and welcome back to our breakout sessions. For this one, we're talking about 5 steps to overcoming your imposter syndrome. For those of you who haven't been with us throughout the day, my name is Emily Jarvis, and I'm the director of NextGen, and I'm also our events manager at GovLoop. So thanks so much for joining us. So self-doubt, second guessing our own abilities, basically I'm talking about myself here, potentially can harm your career trajectory. And we often get stuck thinking we're not ready to take on this new project or interview or be more senior. And sadly, this kind of self-doubt is more common than you might think. So even though imposter syndrome is widely reported, there are some practical steps you can take to push back internal fears and doubts and achieve your professional goals. And today we're going to go over those steps with our speaker. But first, like always, we have a few reminders to go over. If you're on Twitter or X or whatever the heck they call that social media platform, share alongside us using the hashtag NextGenGov. We also have some great resources available for you to download on this console, and that includes the slide deck. And just as a spoiler alert, if you're one of the top 50 attendees in our summit today, you're going to get Tiana's book, and you definitely want that asset. Yeah, she's got it behind her. So make sure you are engaging within the environment. All right, back into my preceded script here. Excuse me, we hope you don't have any difficulties, but if you do, send us a message to that Q&A tab, and my colleague Jessica will get your questions answered. It's in that same portal where you can ask our experts questions, so don't you dare be shy, put them in early and often. We also have the open chat available, so you can chat along with your fellow attendees in there. And if you miss anything, don't worry, we'll email you a link to the entire event tomorrow, which will be sent directly to your inbox, so you'll be able to check it out again. We are also, for this session, giving out 1 CPE credit. What are the 3 things you're going to do? You're going to take all of the poll questions. You're going to fill out the post-event evaluation. You're going to stick around for the entire thing. You're not going to want to miss it anyways. You do those 3 things, and we're going to send you your CPE certificate. All right, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce you to our expert. I should call her our best-selling expert. We've got Tiana Sanchez with us. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I feel like I'm family at this point. Yes. Since I've been here. So welcome everybody. I am in Southern California. So wherever you are, I think I saw a few people chiming in from Maryland, and I think it was like Wyoming, maybe Arizona. I see a few folks from all over, and some really interesting things going on in the chat. So we're going to keep that theme of interesting with learning new things and insights going forward today as we delve into the topic about the 5 Ps to overcoming imposter syndrome. And it really is, what is imposter syndrome, and kind of identifying the areas that you may yourself be encountering. So I do like to set us up for what we can expect to learn today, and then I'll share a little bit more about who I am and why this topic really resonates with me as much as I hope it resonates with you. So our learning goals today, what's imposter syndrome? We may have an idea, concept, and a thought, but we're gonna really define it and talk through it today. We're also going to talk about, and I want you to really reflect on the triggers, the effects, the causes where it may have stemmed for you, maybe an experience that has happened for you, maybe in childhood. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to also discuss what are some of the ways that when we find ourselves experiencing this, how it may hold us back from future opportunities. And then I'm going to share some ways to combat imposter syndrome. And it really starts with how we think about ourselves. So as much as others influence that, we're going to talk about how we need to shift a bit of our thinking. So I'm going to put this slide up here, and I love this because I taught this class in another group, and this thought of flying in a first class seat just resonated with me. And I said, imposter syndrome feels to me like booking a first class ticket on a flight and then constantly questioning if you truly deserve to be there. I don't know if anybody in the room has ever been on a first class flight. If you have, type it in the chat. And, or if you were in economy and you passed through, you know, the first class cabin, you know, there's this kind of sense of, I don't know if there's an air, but there's people that you like, oh, you feel like they deserve to, like, you feel like maybe they're a little rich, they're wealthy, maybe they do something really great. And you're like, okay, this is the VIP of flying, right? So I see a lot of people have, some people have never, but it gets this sense. Now, when I first started flying, I didn't book first class tickets, but then I started as I, you know, understood why people fly first class. You know, you get the service of the flight attendant, you get sometimes things before takeoff, and it just felt wonderful. But there, I couldn't help, as a woman of color, oftentimes walking into a first class cabin, not seeing a lot of people that looked like me and starting to question and look around like, ooh, do I belong? And it just kind of made me feel this doubt a little bit as I was walking. So this quote really resonates with me. With that being said, when I was growing up, I grew up in a family of 5. I had an older sister and a younger brother. And my ancestry is African-American, but also Mexican-American. And when I was a young kid in elementary school, I remember, now, I don't know how old you all are, but we used to take roll call. Like, there was, the teacher would be at the front of the class and they would call the children up and you would get your syllabus or your schedule, but you'd have to walk, you'd have to stand up and you have to walk to the front of the class, get your syllabus, and then go sit back down or whatever it was, right? And I'm talking elementary school. From as early as I could remember from childhood, I remember always being so self-conscious of when the teacher was going to call my name, because outwardly I know how I look. I'm a Black woman, I'm a Black child, but I have a Latin last name. And my concern and fear was always that the teacher was going to call my name and I knew I had to go up to the front and people were going to stare at me and people were going to look at me and start to scratch their heads like, why is she coming up to the front? Her last name can't possibly be Sanchez. And I did this from as early as probably first grade to high school. I hated having to go up to the front to the point where I would just like really sit in the back and kind of hide myself and gingerly walk to the front when the teacher called my name. And I remember that resonated with me. I felt like an imposter. I felt like, well, you know, I really didn't belong with, you know, the Latin folks having that Latin last name. And so for me, that was just an example. And I want you to think about not only your professional life, but also in your personal life, where we may find some of these doubts and feelings of fraud and imposter syndrome. So what is it? Well, the definition of imposter syndrome is it's a psychological condition that is characterized by persistent doubt. What is persistence, right? Constant, over and over and over again. So not just having doubt one time, but it's persistent. And it's around concerning your ability or accomplishments. Again, and we're thinking of the workplace. For me, I didn't have any ability or accomplishments in in elementary school, but I still felt this kind of imposter syndrome. But this is accompanied by the fear of being exposed as a fraud, quote, fraud, despite your own evidence of your success. So there's something going on in our head psychologically that leads us to believe that we're not qualified, we're not competent, we're not skilled, despite having proof that we are. So I'm going to invite you to watch it's about a 3-minute video. I'm going to play it, and I do want you to watch carefully because there's going to be some poll questions that come after this video. But I want you to watch, I want you to take some notes and kind of listen to as we dive deeper into a little bit of the history around imposter syndrome.
Even after writing 11 books and winning several prestigious awards, Maya Angelou couldn't escape the nagging doubt that she hadn't really earned her accomplishments. Albert Einstein experienced something similar. He described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve as much attention as it had received. Accomplishments at the level of Angelou's or Einstein's are rare, but their feeling of fraudulence is extremely common. Why can't so many of us shake feelings that we haven't earned our accomplishments, or that our ideas and skills aren't worthy of others' attention? Psychologist Pauline Rose Clance was the first to study this unwarranted sense of insecurity. In her work as a therapist, she noticed many of her undergraduate patients shared a concern. Though they had high grades, they didn't believe they deserved their spots at the university. Some even believed their acceptance had been an admissions error. While Clance knew these fears were unfounded, she could also remember feeling the exact same way in graduate school. She and her patients experienced something that goes by a number of names: imposter phenomenon, imposter experience, and imposter syndrome. Together with colleague Suzanne Imes, Clance first studied imposterism in female college students and faculty. Their work established pervasive feelings of fraudulence in this group. Since that first study, the same thing has been established across gender, race, age, and a huge range of occupations, though it may be more prevalent and disproportionately affect the experiences of underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. To call it a syndrome is to downplay how universal it is. It's not a disease or an abnormality, and it isn't necessarily tied to depression, anxiety, or self-esteem. Where do these feelings of fraudulence come from? People who are highly skilled or accomplished tend to think others are just as skilled. This can spiral into feelings that they don't deserve accolades and opportunities over other people. And as Angelou and Einstein experienced, there's often no threshold of accomplishment that puts these feelings to rest. Feelings of imposterism aren't restricted to highly skilled individuals either. Everyone is susceptible to a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance, where we each doubt ourselves privately, but believe we're alone in thinking that way because no one else voices their doubts. Since it's tough to really know how hard our peers work, how difficult they find certain tasks, or how much they doubt themselves, there's no easy way to dismiss feelings that we're less capable than the people around us. Intense feelings of imposterism can prevent people from sharing their great ideas or applying for jobs and programs where they'd excel. At least so far, the most surefire way to combat imposter syndrome is to talk about it. Many people suffering from imposter syndrome are afraid that if they ask about their performance, their fears will be confirmed. And even when they receive positive feedback, it often fails to ease feelings of fraudulence. But on the other hand, hearing that an advisor or mentor has experienced feelings of imposterism can help relieve those feelings. The same goes for peers. Even simply finding out there's a term for these feelings can be an incredible relief. Once you're aware of the phenomenon, you can combat your own imposter syndrome by collecting and revisiting positive feedback. One scientist who kept blaming herself for problems in her lab started to document the causes every time something went wrong. Eventually, she realized most of the problems came from equipment failure and came to recognize her own competence. We may never be able to banish these feelings entirely, but we can have open conversations about academic or professional challenges. With increasing awareness of how common these experiences are, perhaps we can feel freer to be frank about our feelings and build confidence in some simple truths. You have talent, you are capable, and you belong. Everyone can use a little extra kick of confidence sometimes. Find out some tips and tricks for boosting yours with this video.
So, it'd be nice to know what you learned from that video as we kind of enter into these polls. So we're going to start our first poll. And honestly, the majority of what we're going to learn about how to combat imposter syndrome we'll find in that. But we're going to talk about the 5 Ps of imposter syndrome, which weren't in that video. So on the screen right now, we're going to launch a poll, because I did say we're going to have a couple of questions from the video. So let's see how well you did. So there should be a poll on your screen. Coming up, and it says, which famous person in the video struggled with imposter syndrome and called themselves an involuntary swindler? So you got 3 options on the screen. So let's see if you check one, and then I'll leave my team to let me know when all the responses are in.
Yeah, we'll give them about 10 more seconds to take the poll here, give everybody a chance to contribute. But I think a few folks in the chat were mentioning they experienced a similar thing to you when they were students in class and didn't want the teacher to call their name either. So you had a lot of folks there. It looks like the results were Albert Einstein.
Yes, absolutely, 100% correct. For those of you who selected George Washington, I'm curious, where do we see George Washington in there? We saw Albert Einstein. I'm like, was he in there somewhere secretly? But yes, 86% Albert Einstein. And back to your point, Emily, I, even today, still get people mispronouncing my name. So that is something I think that, universally we experience, but thank you for sharing that. We do have another poll question as we pop over here. So according to the video, we're going to be launching this poll question right now. According to the video that you just watched, what other name is there for imposter syndrome? Well, let me phrase it this way. We listed about 3 different names, but there's a name not mentioned that imposter syndrome is not called. So you're going to be given some options and basically going to select the one that you did not see. So imposter syndrome was called 3 different names. What's the one that's not listed in there? Okay, so we'll give you some time to think about that. And if you've already responded, you want to throw something in the chat telling me one thing, one word that stood out to you from the video while we're letting our colleagues fill out the poll. You can do that as well.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to ask while they're doing that is, where do you see a lot of imposter syndrome coming into play for kind of mid-career folks? Because I think when you're brand new, you're like, I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. I got this brand new job. And when you're a senior official, maybe the imposter syndrome registers itself in some different ways. Where do you see it for that mid-level group?
I was actually going to say mid-level, even high career, whenever you start to advance in your career. I think we see a lot of people that have opportunities given to them. Maybe they're given praise and that praise makes them feel uncomfortable. They're being presented with career opportunity. They're being thanked. They're being, offered on new projects. Sometimes I've had clients that I've coached that they've been offered a promotion, and through that promotion, they're starting to second guess whether or not they deserve that promotion or the accolades. And that can happen in mid-level career. You don't have to be a senior leader or a C-suite. But somewhere in that mid-level career, you actually start doing well. That's when the doubt starts to come in many cases. When you looked at Albert Einstein and Maya Angelou, incredible in their own right, also experienced that. So that's where I've seen it.
Cool.
All right. So it looks like we do have some responses. So imposter addiction, yes, is the correct one. So imposter syndrome has been known to go by imposter experience. It also has been known to go by imposterism. But imposter addiction is not something that we hear as common with this term. Okay. All right. So I'm going to continue on, and please continue to put thoughts in the chat as we navigate. So we're going to talk about the 5 Ps of imposter syndrome. And these 5 Ps, as we go through them, I want you to start thinking, because in here we are going to have like a business case scenario. So we're going to do a little activity. Once I go through the 5 Ps, I'm going to put up a business case on the screen, and we're going to kind of see how this plays out in real time in someone in a work environment. So the first of the dangerous Ps we're going to talk about is pleasing. So now we understand that imposter syndrome is a psychological kind of, I don't want to call it a disorder, but it's something psychological where we start to think of ourselves as a fraud based on evidence and proof to the contrary, right? So one of the things that we see with imposter syndrome is this pleasing attitude. There's a sense of constantly seeking approval and validation from others in order to feel competent. So again, think about your own experience, your own role. Where have you may have experienced this where you've sought out constant validation and approval from others in order to make yourself feel good? The other thing that we see with pleasing is an overcommitment. So you're overcommitting to tasks. You're chewing off, you're doing more than you can actually accomplish. You're taking on tasks and responsibilities to please other colleagues and maybe leaders, often leading to burnout. Now, that's a term that we've often heard about, especially in the last few years. We've heard this term, burnout. Now we can even see a little bit of the connection to where maybe some of us have experienced burnout that has been caused by this imposter syndrome, right? The third thing that we might see with pleasing is this anxious feeling and this fear about not meeting others' expectations, which often results in excessive people-pleasing behavior. So when you think about, again, as we go through, I want you to begin to identify for yourself. You got a little piece of paper, you got a notepad. As I go through these 5 Ps, start to think about which one have you experienced, maybe previously or currently. And then that'll help us again. So once we can identify, then we can tackle and combat, okay? So please it. And just in this first one, and if you're feeling really bold, you can type in, like, you can do a little hand emoji or like, oh, that sounds like me. If you feel like you want to do that, no shame here. This is a brave space. So pleasing is our first dangerous P. So is this something that you've experienced? We're going to toggle to our second P, which is proving, okay? So when we think of proving as a dangerous P, working excessively, long hours to demonstrate our worth and our competence. So have you ever taken on a task, and I'll raise my hand, and it required you to stay extra hours. It required you to work more than 40 hours a week. And it affects your time with your family, your kids, your significant other, maybe even your rest. And you feel as though by working constantly and all these excessive hours, somehow you're proving to your bosses, your superiors, that, hey, I'm worth it. I'm here, I'm doing the work. You can count on me. I'm confident, I'm competent, right? So you're doing all that, not necessarily for yourself, but for others. I see a lot of yeses coming up, and yes, even Emily very transparently said hands all the way up, yes. So a lot of us, yep, and I see Whitney, I tend to do a lot of proving just to justify it. So there's people in this space that feel the same way. So all of you have experienced to some degree, or many of you have experienced that. The second thing that we experience with proving is frequently volunteering for high visibility projects. Keyword high visibility. What does that mean? That means that it's going to put me in front of others. Maybe in the organization, it's a lead project where there's a lot of different departments or people that are relying on me to make sure this project gets done. And so high visibility, maybe high level type of projects to prove skills and values. The other thing that proving is about feeling this intense pressure to achieve perfection. Now, perfection in itself is its own dangerous P, which we'll talk about. But in this instance, proving we are feeling this anxiousness and this pressure to achieve perfection in tasks, to validate our own abilities. And so this perfection definitely leads to, which we're going to talk about in performance, which is another P, about you're doing things over and over again just to get it right. And there's never never a moment where you feel like it's absolutely done, okay? So, yep, seeing a lot of hands go up in the air. So this is P. So if this is proving, if this is you and you're like, yep, is this me? This sounds like me. Do a little hand emoji. I see some coming through. So we've gone pleasing and we've gone proving. That's 2. So here's the third. Yes, we might need a little counseling, a little therapy after this. Love it. So here's the third P. And you can see all the red coming out on this screen, right? You can look at the facial expressions of the people on the screen. Perfecting. Let's just pause and talk about perfection. Is perfection a real thing? What are your thoughts? Whether you agree or disagree, seeking perfection, is that something that we should even aspire to? I often hear, having a personal trainer at one point in my career, having watched and done the beach body workouts, that the phrase, we seek progress, not perfection, sticks out in my mind. Somebody typed that in the chat. That was a quote worthy of repeating. We should be seeking progress, not perfection. So perfection really is something that I think holds a lot of us back and fits right into this kind of imposter syndrome. So this P is about obsessing over minor details to ensure that every task is flawless. But here's the kicker. When you do that, it often leads to inefficiency, because guess what? You're going over your notes over and over and over again. You're rewriting, then you're going over it again, then you're rewriting, then you're going to send it over to somebody to look at. All during that time, you're wasting time, you're losing time. Maybe you've missed out on a deadline, and you've ended the project being inefficient. Now, this is not to say this happens one time, right? Hey, you got a big project presentation and you want to make sure everything is aligned. We're not saying that. We're saying this happens all the time. So note, when I'm describing these, it's a constant thing that's happening all the time. So if you're a person that obsesses over details all the time on every task, no matter how small or big, then you might be experiencing or struggling with imposterism. The second thing is now delaying project completion due to constant revisions and fear of imperfection. So again, you're constantly thinking about. I will tell you, I worked with a client in local government, and the CEO of the organization is probably close to perfectionism as you can be. And one of the employees who I was working with and coaching described the culture of always being so extra cautious of sending correspondence, emails, because the thought that the CEO was going to correct. So a lot of the employees would go over with a fine-tooth comb constantly over and over and over again. And they shared this with me in a recent training that we did, that it started to create some level of anxiety because of the fear of making a mistake, and the individual, the CEO, calling them on that it created this culture where all of the employees were feeling like that. So in that example, yes, it's you experiencing that. This was even bigger because it was something in the organization altogether. The third thing is feeling extreme anxiety and self-doubt when faced with the possibility of making mistakes. We all are going to make mistakes. It's your experience. You see one of the books back here, we talk about failure. Failure is an experience and will happen, but it's how you recover from it. But if you're the type of person that fears making a mistake or failure, and you fear that all the time, then you might be experiencing this P, perfecting, this dangerous P of perfecting, okay? And definitely read the chats, because I'm seeing a lot of good conversation happening there. Number 4P, performing, okay? We are in the Western society, in the United States, we are a culture of work. We are a culture that says you wake up early in the morning, you get up, you get to work, you work 8 to 10 hours a day, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. We're always performing. You even hear the term high performers, right? That's a term that we utilize very frequently in our work environments. So are you a type of person that constantly over prepares for tasks and presentations, again, to avoid mistakes and scrutiny? Nothing wrong with preparing for a presentation, but over preparation, what does that look like? Are you spending additional time rereading your research that you've gathered? Maybe re-interviewing people that you've already talked to, starting over from scratch when you've already got everything together? Are you a person that feels the need to constantly outperform peers to feel secure in your role? So does someone else's success determine how you feel? If that's you, you might be struggling with the performing part of imposter syndrome. And then lastly, are you experiencing persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of success? That in itself is what imposter syndrome is. If that is you, you might be experiencing, again, performing. I see here, someone says over practicing for presentations because I'm not comfortable with public speaking. Now that actually is good. Now you say over practicing. What does that look like? Oh, I'm spending hours. These hours are cutting into my dinner time. These hours are cutting into my family time. I'm now not getting sleep because I'm over practicing, right? When it starts to affect other areas of your life, that's problematic. When you are preparing for a presentation, you're going to do your time, you're going to practice. I have a whole thing before I got to deliver my presentation 3 times before I deliver a keynote. I have a whole thing that I go through. That's preparation. Now, over preparation might be like, oh, Tiana, I'm going to do it 8 times and I'm going to do it this much. I'm going to be thinking about it. I'm going to be spending additional time on it. So that would fall under the category of this. And our last P is pretending. Now, this one here is closely related to, and this is a whole other conversation, but somewhat closely related to a topic that I addressed with another group, particularly people of color, which we talk about code switching. I had a client once, was working with them, and we were talking about his feeling of imposter syndrome. It was a male. And I do believe women experience a little bit more of imposter syndrome than men. There's studies to show that. But he was experiencing imposter syndrome as he described it. And he said, when I'm in certain spaces, though, I do feel like I change the way I am just to meet those needs. I want them to see me in a certain light. And so I change the way that I show up for them. I even talk a little differently. I may say certain things. And I thought that was interesting. And I said, yes, it does have elements of imposter syndrome. However, there's also kind of an undertone of potential code switching. And even though this is not a topic about code switching, I'm going to challenge all of you to kind of jot that down. And if anyone is, knows that, you can type it in the chat box. But it is something that I do think those of us who feel less like they belong, less or more of a fraud or more of an imposter, will often switch certain mannerisms and behaviors so that we can seem more acceptable. So we might pretend to be someone or act like someone that we're really not. So the first part of this P of pretending is adopting a persona that aligns with one beliefs of others expect. So I'm behaving in a way that I think you want me to behave, that you expect me to behave, as opposed to being authentic. Early as a speaker, when I was very green, I would say this is like 14 years ago, I came from the corporate world. So I worked in the financial industry, I worked in retail, and I always worked as a manager, right? So when you're in a management role, as many of you here are, you carry yourself a certain way. So when I started dipping my toes into the speaking arena, when I would get on stage, I found myself becoming very rigid, like very composed, even the way that I spoke. And there was nothing wrong with it. As you know, though, when to speak, when you're resonant, it's not just in the tone and the diction, it's about the connection with the audience. They want to know who you are authentically, genuinely, even telling a story, a personal story. So early on, I would never do that. And then after, it took a while. I listened to some of my favorite speakers and I watched how they connected. And then after a while, I remember, I'm like, okay, I'm going to bring a little bit more Tiana because it's who I am. And I started to get a little bit more loose and relaxed. And I call it my girlfriend tone. And so if there's any women on the call, there's a girlfriend tone or your homeboy tone. When you're talking with the fellas, you're talking with the guys, you use a certain vernacular, certain language. You're talking with your girlfriends, you kind of have a little bit of a loose tone. So I started to weave that my personality into that and stopped just pretending that I was one-dimensional. Like, if you're going to embrace me as a speaker, embrace all of me, right? So that's number one. Number two in pretending is frequently second-guessing yourself and feeling the need to fake confidence and knowledge. How many of you can finish this sentence? Fake it till I'm gonna let you type it in the chat bot and see how many remember that. We grew up on that terminology, right? Fake it until you blank, right? And so many of us who've grown up in that environment think about, yes, fake it until you make it. And many of us have grown up into that environment that we believe that, hey, if I don't have it all together, that's okay. That's just the way we're supposed to do. I'm a Gen Xer. That's how I was grown up. But there's many of you that may not have grown up that way, or I don't want to fake confidence. I don't want to fake my knowledge. I want to be authentic in who I am. And so you're second guessing yourself, and then you're just kind of pretending and being in spaces, you're showing up how you think others want you to be. And then lastly, you experience guilt or discomfort. This is a really big one. From receiving praise or recognition, you actually feel undeserving. I want to pause right here because I think many of us struggle with this one right here. I think when someone gives you praise, the best response is simply thank you. But oftentimes, how do we respond? We'll say, oh, it was nothing. Oh, it was no big deal. Well, I took a shortcut. I didn't really do it. Chat GPT helped me. It was just, that thing. We will downplay that praise that we get from somebody else because we feel undeserving of it. The other reason it could be is that maybe you were taught, again, because and we're going to get into it in a minute, there's things in our childhood that have caused us to take on this kind of type of psychological or this behavior. Me growing up, somebody, gave you a compliment. You were very humble, right? You had to cross your hands. You were just very humble, and you didn't brag. You didn't showcase. You didn't boast. These terms, like we heard being egotistical or conceited and things like that. And like, yes, someone says it makes you feel awkward. Absolutely. It's like, I want the praise, but then I feel awkward when I get it. And so I really, truly think that this is something that probably is stemmed from our childhood, that is carried into our adulthood and even where we are today. And so I'm going to tell you some things that I do to help in that. So if you've gone over these 5 Ps, take a deep breath, because I do know that a lot of you in here have said, you know what, hey, I'm 4 of 4, I'm 5 of 5. A lot of these describe who I am. So as we go through this, I want you to recognize that this is not a label. This is not who you are. What you are identifying is potential behavior or potential thought pattern that you are experiencing maybe at certain times. And guess what? We're going to combat that. So it's not a label. It's not anything like that. Okay. So here's a little pop quiz for you. We're going to recap the dangerous Ps. So we have 5 of them. Now, I'm going to give you a description as we launch this next poll. Which dangerous P describes constantly seeking approval and validation from others to feel competent, as well as feeling anxious and fearful about not meeting others' expectations? So while that poll is going up, see if you can respond. And then, Emily, if there's anything you want to check in on.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So first of all, my mom always used to say, you can't be too big for your britches. You got to stay humble. And that it's stuck in my head. So whenever anyone says anything nice, I'm like, oh, no, that's it. It didn't matter. It was fine. It can be really hard to get that praise. And so Carrie asked, how do you accept praise without seeming conceited? I love this question because there's still this fear of owning your greatness. So how do you do that?
It's funny because as you were reading that question, I was responding to that question. Literally, it is simple. Say thank you and you smile. Thank you. That is it. When we feel awkward, because the awkwardness comes in trying to explain why you should receive the credit. You feel the need to explain or over-explain why the person is thanking you. And you feel like you want to describe, oh, well, I did this, and oh, I did that, and oh, and then we want to make excuses. So to shut your own mouth and to just shut it down, all you need are 2 words. Thank you. And you smile. And that's it. You don't have to go into any detail. You don't have to explain why you did it, how many hours you did it, what you did. Oh, yeah, I went to school and got a degree for this. Because then you're trying to prove. You're trying to validate. And that was one of the Ps. You feel like you have to prove to them why you're getting the credit. All you need to do. Thank you. I really appreciate that. You can say that if you want. That's it. That's a start. We'll start there.
I like it. All right. The results are in, and pleasing was at the top of the list, with proving coming in second.
Yes. So the correct answer for this one is pleasing. So the pleasing is the one where we're constantly seeking approval, where from others. Now, if you said proving, probably what felt similar was the feeling of trying to achieve perfection and wanting to validate one's ability. So that's proving, working long hours to demonstrate competence. So I wanted to make that distinction. But pleasing is all about seeking approval, maybe feeling anxious about others not meeting their expectations, and overcommitting to tasks leading to burnout. So very similar, but different. All right, we got another poll that we're going to, oh, we don't have another poll. Okay, we got a different scenario. So now what I want to do is I have two different scenarios, because I think this is good when we describe it, right? So now I've given you definition, I've described, I've shared some of my personal experience. You've all have kind of thought a little bit about your own, you've done some reflecting. So what I want to do is just, let's look at it in a real workplace scenario. And let's see how each of the 5 Ps, kind of the elements of the 5 Ps, can play out in a work environment. So we have Sam. Sam is a marketing manager, and Sam is preparing a presentation for an important client meeting, right? Sounds very common, something you may have to do this week or next week, right? So we're going to look at each element. So let's say pleasing. So pleasing, if Sam were experiencing the imposterism or one of the dangerous Ps of pleasing, it might look like this. So Sam might constantly seek the boss's, might constantly adjust the slides to match the boss's preferences, fearing disappointment. Sam may rework the slides over and over again instead of trusting their own expertise. Sam may feel disappointing, may feel anxious about disappointing the team. So if P was an area that Sam was experiencing, those would be some of the things. So again, now it brings you to a more of a real world scenario so that you can see how this might look. Now let's look at proving. Okay, so if Sam were experiencing the P, the dangerous P of proving, Sam might volunteer for multiple high profile tasks beyond their capability, beyond their presentation, to show the worth. Sam may take on extra tasks, right? Working late, into the night, right? It's crossing over into family time. It's crossing over into your rest time, just to prove that they're valuable to the team, that they are essential. I am needed. I am important to this project. So I'm going to take on extra stuff beyond what you've asked me to do, right? I'm going to work late, do all of these things. That would be the P of proving. Okay, so now we're seeing that in real time. Now, if we looked at the third one, which is perfecting, now Sam may be obsessing over details in design in the slides, because right, they have to deliver a presentation. So now it's obsessing over minor details as they're finalizing the presentation. It might even cause a delay in the final version because Sam fears that any imperfection is going to reflect poorly on their abilities. And that is a real thing. Just like the company that I shared with you, who now has this kind of culture of anxiety almost in their employees, because they fear that even sending this email, that individual is going to catch something. And honestly, it happened to me. Now, I'm not an employee. I'm a contractor. They were my client. And I recall sending an email and getting a response back saying these things were an error in my email. And I was taken aback. I was surprised. I was like, okay, I'll make sure to, do my best and get it better next time. And I remember I did a couple other emails and little things. And so I finally realized, okay, maybe I need to have a second pair of eyes taking a look at this and try to see if we can catch some of those errors prior. Did that. But I found myself too, for a short period of time, obsessing like, oh my gosh, what if he finds a mistake, and is that going to reflect badly? And at some point I had to let it go. I said, guess what? I'm human and I make human error. And if that is going to be a decision-making thing for you, whether or not to work with me, and you can't experience or accept that we're human, we make human errors, and that, something minor, then we may need to reevaluate our partnership. But it never came to that. So 7 years later, I'm still working with them. So that's perfecting. Now, performing, what this looks like for Sam would be over preparing. So again, not just preparing, but over preparing, practicing endlessly to ensure that there are no mistakes, doubting their abilities despite previous success. Maybe Sam feels like, I'm not good enough for this presentation after all. Maybe they heard 3 other people go and now they're starting to doubt and question, even though they spent hours, they practiced, they spent time, now they're starting to doubt. And pretending, let's say Sam is actually doing the presentation right now. And during the presentation, Sam decides to pretend and kind of act in this more confident way in the meeting, but inside, Sam is feeling like a fraud, feeling unsure, feeling doubtful, second guessing every point that they make, and feeling like I'm just not qualified despite getting good feedback after the presentation. So this is an example in real time that we can see what it could look like for someone working. And this is just delivering a presentation. And I truly believe Sam, in this example, probably if we were to go back and look at Sam's history, childhood, upbringing, we would recognize that there were some triggers. There were some things that probably happened that created maybe this kind of psychological, we'll call it a disorder, although it's not, this kind of psychological way of thinking, this behavior, and it came from an experience. And I share with you when I was a child and having to go up to the front of the classroom because I had a Latin last name and I looked like this. And as a child, that bothered me. As I grew up, I realized Latin people look like me all over the country, all over the world. But as a child, I didn't realize that. So I want you to really think, there's a question on the screen, and I want all of us to consider this. When did you experience imposter syndrome? How did it hold you back? And how did you handle it? It's an opportunity for us to just kind of have a little dialogue around what did it come in, was it childhood? Was it a supervisor who gave you really poor feedback or maybe made a comment? Was it a parent that said something to you that really stuck with you? Was it the fact that you didn't get a degree when you left high school, other things took precedence and you didn't, get a degree? What were some of those things?
Yeah.
And so it's a great opportunity for us to kind of have a dialogue around this. So Emily, I'm going to let you see if there's anything coming through the chat.
Yeah. We'll give folks a second or two to add in their thoughts. But I will say for myself, in college, I went to school to be a journalist. I thought I was going to be a foreign correspondent to Spain. Turns out that's not a job, but I was really dedicated to it. And one of my professors told me that I had the voice of a chickadee and could not be a broadcast producer or a broadcast anchor. Now, what the voice of a chickadee is exactly, I'm still not 100% sure, but it didn't sound like a good thing. And it really stopped me from, applying to some of those jobs, because I was like, no one wants to listen to the sound of my voice. And that still might be true, but it definitely had an impact. But let's look at what other people had to say in here.
Yes, I want to comment on a couple, which one person said in 7th grade when they moved to a new state in school. Yes. I think this is very poignant. Someone said placing children in gifted and talented harmed a lot of kids. So it kind of almost segregated. It created a class system, even as young as you were, saying these kids are smarter than you, these kids are not so smart. And then it leaves that stigma. So thank you for sharing that. Another person said that their stepdad said that they couldn't do something because they were a girl. You know what's fascinating about that? There's a commercial that has I think it's a Nike commercial, but it has a bunch of people, young kids and grown adults. And someone asks them, what does it mean to be a girl? And maybe you've seen this commercial. I love it. It's great. What does it mean to be a girl? And so they kind of describe it, right? And it's a sports, and they say, okay, well, show me how to run like a girl. And you have the adults that kind of do this like little slow run. What does it mean to throw like a girl? And the adults are going like this, and they're doing it very, very demure, very mindful. I have to throw that in there. And so, and then they ask the young kids, and when they say, well, what does it mean to run like a girl? And they run real fast. It means running real fast. What does it mean to throw like a girl? And they give like a really good throw. So that tells us that, again, our upbringing, how we were raised, and maybe even the generation in which we were raised, the parents that we had, the upbringing really played a part in that. Supervisors, yes. We have a responsibility as leaders, managers, to uplift our people and be mindful of our words. Changing schools. Oh my gosh, there's so many. And if I don't get to you, please know that you are seen, because I do see your comments. I want to stick with our time. And if you see something, Emily, that pops out that you want to share, because I do see a lot of people being very transparent and vulnerable, and something that's sticking out. And if you're reading this, please comment, let them know that you see it.
One of the ones that struck me in here was parents demanding A's, and then you bring home A's and there was nothing. You kind of got in trouble when you didn't meet expectations, but if you did, there wasn't a whole lot of reward or praise that went alongside that. So that can be really trying and difficult. A lot of folks were saying that they didn't feel quote unquote smart enough, whether they were coming from one family in particular, college peers, having different kind of academic preparation. There was a lot of that. There were some disabilities at play, whether it's ADHD or dyslexia, not feeling, quite up to speed with some of that stuff.
I appreciate the level of transparency, because this is a part of combating. What was one of the things, and this is actually one of the ways you combat imposter syndrome, is talk about it. That was in the video. We don't realize that there's others in our space, in our sphere, that experience what we're experiencing. And so when we get to talk about it in these kind of brave spaces, then it eliminates that taboo feeling, and kind of it does away with the power that maybe imposterism may have. And so I love that this is kind of creating this. We're actually combating it in real time by having these conversations. So with the time that we have left, and if you can give me a quick time check, Emily.
Yeah, we have technically about 10 minutes left. Now we can go a couple minutes over, but gotcha. Around 10 minutes.
Okay, so with what we know about imposter syndrome, and again, it's known by a few other names, one of the things we know for certain is that it comes from, we talked about this psychological, right? So there's something in our psyche, something in our mind, something in our thoughts, our thought patterns. Now, I could be wrong, but I want to say there's 20,000 plus, it might be 50,000 thoughts that we have a day, okay? Not surprisingly, most of those thoughts are negative, okay? So when we have negative thoughts, we have to be able to combat those thoughts. And with imposter syndrome, it is all about our inner critic, where we think about, we have this kind of fear of failure in my head. Oh my God, what am I gonna do if I fail? There's this negative self-talk. Oh, I'm not good enough. I don't think I'm qualified. There's so many other people better than me. And let me tell you, I've experienced this myself. And I have to catch myself, because if I begin to do it too much, then it becomes this kind of imposter syndrome. If I have a thought that comes in and I counter it with something else, I don't consider that being hijacked by imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh, I had a thought, boom, but I washed it away. So it's all of these thoughts of thinking that I need to be perfect. I'm worried about being found out. I'm having these feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. I'm a speaker, and there are phenomenal speakers out there. And there's moments where I'm like, ooh, am I as good as them? Oh, they wrote 10 books. Oh, I've only, written 3, or, oh, they're this and that. And it becomes this comparison which again is probably a related cousin to imposter syndrome, is when we start to compare ourselves. But I heard a speaker once say that we have to run our own race, that when we were growing up, we heard the term on your mark, get set, go, right? On your mark. Yeah, I think on your mark, get set, go. And instead of on your mark, it should be on my mark. And so instead of looking at the people that are starting off with you, you focus on yourself and not have that comparison. So with the kind of inner critic that we have and we think about, I want you to consider this. And because we have less than 10 minutes left, get your pen out. We'll do just this quick exercise, something, a little bit of a homework assignment, if you will. But I want you to write this down. I want you to reflect, because we are getting close to the end. We have one more poll, and then I'm going to wrap up with a final thought. How does imposter syndrome manifest in a negative self-talk and limiting beliefs that you do? So not for anyone else. How does it manifest for you? So for example, for me, I would say something like, oh, I don't know if I'm as good a speaker as they are. Or my pedigree, my degree, where I come from, my background. I'm like, oh, I don't know that I have the educational, background like they do. Are they going to look at me a certain way and not want me to be a part of whatever they're doing? For me, that's how I think. So that's question number one. Question number two is write down one recurring thought or belief that you have when you experience imposter syndrome. So like we saw in the inner critic slide, is the common theme, I'm not good enough, I'm not qualified, or, ooh, this isn't right, there's so many other people better than me, or, oh, they're going to find me out. What's that one thing, just that one thought that's a constant that you do all the time, probably when you're in the throes of the 5 dangerous P's or one of the dangerous P's? Number 3, reframe that thought. So as you're going through this exercise, and maybe some of you are doing it now, some of you will do it later, reframe that thought into a more constructive, empowering statement. We call challenging your assumptions, or challenging your negative thought. So as opposed to I'm not qualified, I would say, well, no, I'm not. All those other speakers are better than me. Let's say I say that to myself. I might say, well, Tiana, you've delivered over 100 talks. You are qualified. You are just as good as the other speakers. I'm now reframing that thought. And it is intentional. When I tell you, it's not something that's just going to happen if you think of negative thought and you're just like, okay, Tiana, I'm waiting for that positive thought to come in. It's not just going to randomly come in. You have to be intentional about thinking that way so that it overshadows that negative thought. The fourth step that I want you to do is how now, when you reflect and you do those first 3 steps, how does adopting this new mindset, I got to combat it with something positive, help you tackle future challenges? What can you now do? So for example, for me, when there's a phrase, and I can't remember what we said, if anything bad can happen, it will happen, or something to that degree. How many of us have ever heard that thought? You can raise your hand, emoji in the chat. If anything bad can happen, it will, right? If anything bad can happen, it's going to happen to me. We've heard that. This is how I flip it. I say, if anything good can happen, it can happen to me. Game changer. And you're probably like, really? Game changer. If anything good can happen, it can happen to me. Something happens, and I'm not a doctor, I am not a behavior analyst, and I have friends that do that. It changes something. It shifts something in your persona, in your identity, when you think differently about yourself. So I'm going to challenge you to do this reflective exercise. And I put up with this reflective exercise, I said a couple of things, and I want you to finish this statement, kind of fill in the blank. A negative blank or belief that is recurring can lead to imposter syndrome. So what is that? Is it a negative action, a negative word, a negative person, or a negative thought? Now, it probably could be all of these, but there's one in particular. There's one thing in particular. What is that fill in the blank? So we're going to put our last poll up on the screen. Emily's going to put that up there. We're going to give you some time to fill that out.
All right, So while they're doing that, two quick things. The first is I just want to thank everybody for being vulnerable in the chat and sharing your thoughts and feelings. It's not always easy, and especially in government, it is not always the safest space. So we really appreciate you being here with us today. And the question for you, Tiana, is there was a session earlier today that was focusing on the generations in the workforce, the fact that there are 5 generations in the workforce. And the theme was really about being your authentic self. And the question for you is, for younger folks, sometimes it can be harder to be their authentic self because they're trying to act a little bit older, seem more mature, more senior. So the question is, at what age did you or others in the chat finally feel ready to be their authentic self? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. Maybe it should be always if you're really, really brave. But how can you kind of quantify that?
I think I'll answer it in 2 parts. Authentic self doesn't mean being a rude self or disrespectful self. And I'm not saying the person who asked this question. I have millennials and Gen Zs. And so sometimes we use the term I'm being authentic as permission to just say whatever we want in any kind of way that we want. That is not that definition so I'll say that. For me, as a speaker, when I mentioned to you that early on, I learned how to be more authentic when I stopped being concerned. I was less concerned about what people thought about me and was more concerned about being true to myself in a respectful way. And that pivotal moment for me happened when I became a speaker and started speaking to different audience. And it helped me because I was very corporatized, if you know what that means. And you have to say a certain way, you have to speak a certain way, you got to, and I'm like, I want to bring Tiana to this space. And sometimes Tiana speaks in a different tone, or, not disrespectfully, but I may say something a little differently, or I may add a perspective that might not be PC in this environment, but I want us to talk about it. So for me, that was that moment. I think that's a fantastic question, probably whole other conversation. But thank you, whoever asked that question. And the correct answer is thought on the screen. So 95% of you got that right. Love it. So we'll wrap up with this, which is combating is looking at self-perception. There's a little, it starts with our thought. It starts with, and this is, I want you to imagine that dot is like circling. Like it starts off really big, just kind of going around in a circle, really growing, because that's our thoughts. It comes out with how you perceive yourself. And then it shifts to what you say about yourself. So it's a thought that comes into what you say about yourself. That then we go into, well, I need to talk to others. Not I'm just talking to myself. I need to talk to others about it. And then finally, we need to get feedback, because here's the thing that it says, talking helps to combat. But one of the things is getting that feedback from others, constantly reminding us that you have done well. You have a proof of success. You have a history of doing great work. And then simply acknowledging and accepting the fact by saying thank you. I think that probably will be the biggest takeaway. When you get the praise, you say thank you. This is my thought on it. We start about flying on an airplane. So when you get to the point, and you may toggle between this, recline, hey, put your headphones on. If you're in first class, you've earned this moment. You say confidently, I fully embrace the good that comes my way, because you are talented, you are capable, and you do belong. So please connect with me. I know we went a little bit over. You have a full day, but if you're on LinkedIn, please connect with me. I absolutely love the vulnerability. I see young folks, I see seasoned folks in the room sharing their experience, and I hope this was a blessing to you all. Emily, I'll give it back to you.
Well, thank you. First and foremost, we have had you on, I don't know, 4 or 5 NextGens at this point. And depending on your willingness, we'll have you on for all of the ones in the future, because I think it's just so important that we talk about these topics from a real and vulnerable perspective. And we appreciate you bringing not only the information, but also the psychological safety to have these conversations. So thank you so much. And for those of you that are in here, as a reminder, the top 50 folks in our environment today are going to earn one of Tiana's books. So you know she's awesome. So get up to the top of that leaderboard. But the session is not, well, this session is over, but the conference is not. We have our closing keynotes coming up in about 10 minutes. So I'll see you over there. Thank you so much again, Tiana. We love you.
Thank you.
And we'll be talking to you all shortly. Bye, everybody.